Welcome to the Hired Geek Podcast, where we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell, Community Engagement Lead at Pathify. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology. The Hired Geek Podcast is a proud member of the Enrollify podcast network, a robust collection of shows designed to help higher education professionals like you grow every day. Explore all of our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.
We are here again with a super special episode of the Hired Geek Podcast, recorded live here in San Diego at the ASU+GSV Air Show. So when I was planning out my schedule for this event, I was just kind of skimming and seeing who's going to be here. Very excited to see that our guest for this episode, Jared Stein from Rarebird EdTech, he was going to be here. I was like, I like talking to you. I like hearing from you, seeing what you have to say about kind of the whole EdTech world. So that's what we're going to keep it kind of open-ended and broad, just going to see kind of what's on your mind, what you're seeing here. This is technically the final day of the Air Show. Summit has some time to go on, so I'm sure there's more new, interesting things that'll be going on. But just if folks don't know you, if you want to briefly introduce yourself, your background, kind of what you do now, and what brought you to the Air Show.
Yeah, Dustin, first, thank you for inviting me to join. This is a great way to break up the day here at the Air Show. I'm Jared Stein. I've worked with higher ed institutions for over a dozen years, leading teams that built and developed and launched fully online courses and programs. And then back in 2011, I joined this little tiny startup called Instructure. They're most famous for their flagship LMS, Canvas. And I was with that company for 11 years. 2023, just over a year ago, I decided to start my own consulting business focused on early stage EdTech companies, growth stage EdTech companies. You could say to give back, but really it's just to be a part of what's happening in EdTech and perhaps contribute with some of the experience and lessons that I've learned over the years.
Yeah, I mean, I think that has to be for anybody just a very unique and valuable, pedigree that you have, and then just, channeling that to be supportive as you kind of deliberately open yourself up to kind of look at the whole field and really, just kind of be of service in that way.
Yeah.
And I guess just this is an interesting moment, certainly just the idea that ASU+GSV is putting on this AI-focused event, bringing together people from all over the country and all over the world. With all of this going on, what excites you about this moment in higher ed tech? It does feel like obviously there's a lot of potential and sort of, speculation about AI in particular, but I feel like there's a lot going on, but just what excites you about this moment?
Yeah, the word excites is interesting because that sort of conveys a really positive emotion. And there's some positive emotion around things that are happening with AI. But I think for higher ed in particular, it's more about the challenges that institutions face coming out of the pandemic, but already, struggling with enrollments, retention, graduation rates, now facing changes in public opinion and more budgetary pressure perhaps than they felt in a very long time. I'm excited, I suppose I could say, to hear from institutions about how they're thinking about technology writ large, but maybe AI in particular, as a means to help them solve those mission-critical challenges that may be unique to their institution, but could be widely shared across higher ed. Yeah, so how does it galvanize them?
Right,
yeah, that's the word I want.
Yeah, because I guess, I can kind of dig in with this one in particular, because it is sort of being presumptuous, or I'm the eternal optimist, and I think everybody in education has some part of that core, but there is a lot of headwinds going on, a lot of things that I think are, there's that undercurrent of worry or sort of anxiety or dread that maybe is people are trying to channel an excitement of being okay, AI, maybe that's going to, fix everything. I guess there's a lot there. One, I guess, clarifying question, what are things that you feel like are the most worrisome? What are the headwinds that you think are going to be particularly just kind of difficult to kind of interface with that you feel like are those things that you kind of need to be obviously mindful of and try to, incorporate into your strategy, whether it's leveraging AI to address it, but I guess just to put both sides of the coin. So this is it's a unique moment for the potential of AI, also unique for the confluence of headwinds. What's something that really you feel like you're kind of cluing in on that might be particularly difficult?
Yeah, I want to be careful not to be presumptuous for any particular higher ed institution, but I think it's probably safe to say that every institution needs to fully understand where they are at, what challenges or problems they are facing, what they've been trying to do about it that has failed, and what might they be able to try with or without technology to overcome those challenges or solve those problems. So just getting super clear at an institutional level, getting very real about the problems that you face, and using that understanding as a basis to craft your strategy. Solutions can come at any point after that.
Yeah, I think that is like, because to me, I've observed these headlines where it's like, okay, University of XYZ has a $150 million budget shortfall. And it's like, I mean, that didn't happen overnight. That idea of like really like as an institutional leader, understanding where it's like, okay, these particular programs seem to be struggling with enrollment, or we just seem to maybe do a great job with admissions and yield, but a horrible job with retention, or vice versa. Like, and how can we bring together all the right stakeholders and really be thoughtful about, like you said, like it could be that technology could be helpful in those situations, but you have to be really, I think this moment is really demanding to be really well calibrated to like, okay, your institution, your goals. How are you kind of like coming up short? What are the things that are working that maybe it's like that idea you're going to have to figure out well, we need to keep doing this, doing more of it because it's working out. We need to stop doing this because it's not working out so well. Or we need to like put more attention on the squeaky wheel, because it's like that's a really important thing to us. We need to have a strong graduate school of education, like we want that to be something that we do and do well. So I think that that's really helpful because I think there's sort of this, common refrain that I'm kind of hearing here is that idea that like, every kind of snickers the idea of just sort of like, oh, AI will fix everything, or everybody here is just sort of like, well, we do this, and I don't know, it's got AI in it somehow. We're not like, there's something just kind of this like ambiguity or sort of like just a lack of intention or structure. So I think on both sides of it, it's like, okay, what are you trying to do, and what are the tools that are going to help you get there? And I think once those two sides of like an institution and like an ed tech company can come together in a really like clear way, I guess, like either side, I feel like it's going to feel like they've, been sort of shortchanged, I guess. Because like the institution's just like, oh, cool, right, shiny thing. Like, yeah, we'll just, kind of throw everything to the wall and see what sticks versus like, this ed tech company is like, excited to work with this institution, but maybe they're not even like getting brought to the table in any substantive way because they're like, yeah, I don't know, come bring us your AI tool and like, we'll see what happens or something. Like, I don't know. I guess so that's kind of, like this interesting moment because I think with the past few years of like digital transformation, there has, I feel like, been this sort of like calibration quietly happening where like, think about maybe like when you're starting an Instructure, maybe some sort of skepticism of vendors and these outsiders trying to like, change the way that institutions operate. But now there's sort of this recognition. It's like, we know we need to leverage supportive partners, but that doesn't negate the fact that it's like, you still need to be kind of scrutinizing and really, both sides really trying to forge a really strong and positive partnership. So.
Yeah, and I think about what you're communicating in a couple of different categories. One is for higher ed institutions. Again, I don't want to presume that this is true of any or all institutions, but you've sort of alluded to some examples of institutions that find themselves in really dire straits where leadership probably should have seen that coming, or if they did see it coming, they were either deliberately inactive or what they were trying to do was failing and they failed to recognize it. In those cases, I think that's a problem. I don't know that that's true for the majority of institutions that are facing mission critical challenges. And of course, there are those institutions that we can just bet our money will be fine no matter what, right? But again, for higher ed leaders, it is so important that you truly understand your most pressing challenges and what you have been trying to do to address that. Otherwise, you will never be able to make a change that's necessary, whether that's internally and or with the help of a solutions provider to address that problem. But that does then connect to what we're doing here at the Air Show, where, this is about AI. It's called the AI revolution in education. Something that we're not seeing quite yet. We're seeing a lot of potential positives and some direct negatives coming out of AI, but we're not seeing a revolution. And I think it's quite easy to look across the vendor hall and see a lot of solutions in search of problems. Doesn't mean they don't have a value proposition, doesn't mean they might not enhance, but what I'm hoping to see and what I'm hoping to uncover and hear from higher ed leaders is that they've identified problems for which AI is the solution because it helps them do something differently. It helps them scale human resources that are otherwise tapped out, or, right, it helps them find a way that they weren't able to find on their own.
Yeah, absolutely. What I love sometimes about these conversations, where like I feel like I'm like trying to figure something out, and it's just talking it out with somebody who I feel like kind of knows better, just like, does this make any sense or whatever. And I think the idea that like it could be both sides. Like if you're walking the show floor here, there are like a lot of cool, different, interesting companies, and I feel like it's like a lot of earlier stage startups and
Yep.
stuff too. So like it is that idea that like everybody's trying to figure out what the revolution is going to be. Like that's almost like you could read it and be like, oh, I guess the revolution's here, everything's happening, whatever. It's like not quite. Everybody's trying to figure out what that's going to mean. Like it's a very future-looking thing, but that does require institutional leaders and providers and companies and everybody to kind of work together to figure out what that revolution is going to look like. Yeah.
And I think education is famous for acting conservatively, moving slowly, but I think that's actually a reflection of some of the things that education does best, which is preserving what works from the past, taking cautious steps in the face of something like a quote-unquote revolution so that you don't end up on the other side damaging your constituents or creating something that you didn't intend to create. So I think a fair amount I think some balance is called for when it comes to AI. Look at what its potential is, look at what the negatives and the downsides might be, and then see if there are instances where it aligns with the things that you're trying to solve or enhances your student or faculty or staff experience, and take it from there.
Yeah, and I'm glad to hear that. I feel like that is a shared sentiment, because that's kind of where my head is at this point. And I think it's been kind of reinforced is like education is deeply human, and like AI can be a great supplement, assistant, augment, and all that, but we don't want it to kind of take away from that human element of teaching and support and all those sort of things. So I think I do feel like a lot of people are taking a pretty measured approach.
And at the same time, I'll just throw in that a lot of areas where education really warrants and does well with human interaction are areas where human interaction is hard to scale. Like you think about academic advising, where many advisors barely have time to interact with students about their schedule, let alone about their lives, about their plans, about what's happening post-college. Again, some institutions do that much better than others, but that's an example where deep human connections ostensibly could be extremely valuable for students, especially those who are struggling or maybe otherwise disadvantaged, and yet it's really hard to scale humans in that way. I'm not saying that AI is the solution there, but that's a good example of where we want it to be highly human. It's just really expensive to make it so.
Well, something I feel like is an interesting kind of variable in just sort of like being at an event like this, where there's so many like, EdTech companies and, just trying to have this sort of intersection where everybody's coming together of like, obviously the companies here are trying to kind of bring awareness to their companies and grow and, court investors and all those sort of things. Like, I think this event has that sort of unique aspect to it where I feel like it's one of the bigger, US-based events that does even court an international audience. And so, it kind of steers a little bit more towards, given its origins, it has roots in kind of just the funding and investing world. So I think there's just been recent reporting around, from the high peaks of the pandemic years, drops in venture capital funding for education technology companies and everything. And I'm curious, you just do have a great perspective on sort of the space as a whole. What do you make of that, if you can like kind of contextualize it a little bit? Because I think it's one of those things, like it's a very grabby headline, but the truth is a little bit more complex as to like what's happening, because I think that's something where it's like probably going to like kind of hamstring, I guess, like the growth or the revolution of AI or anything else. So yeah, what do you make of that kind of that recent news?
Yeah, if you step back and take a much wider view, you see continued growth in EdTech investments since really starting from about 2010, 2011. And then you see the pandemic era spike, which is natural in response to the fact that so many students are now online. So many schools are looking to adopt, and in fact, actively adopting technology to help them make that a viable experience. It's no surprise then that post-pandemic, those spikes returned to what you might expect to be more of a normal. Now, it still appears that funding levels are a little down from pre-pandemic, but the contrast that you have between the pandemic era investment in EdTech and what you have today, it's not a fair comparison unless you really did expect that to truly revolutionize how money is being spent in schools, and you expected federal funds to continue indefinitely. That said, I think there have been some changes in terms of how investors are thinking about and looking at EdTech. I think the investment community in general is much better educated about EdTech and how buying cycles work in B2B and what's actually possible with B2C and what's not possible. And, right, you see some of that reflected, I think, in adjustments in multiples that EdTechs might get on exit. I think those are more like corrections based upon greater wisdom and understanding of how the market works and what's attainable. Doesn't mean that EdTech is a bad place to invest. I actually think it's a tremendously positive way to balance financial returns with socio-demographic returns. But I think investors are smarter about it today, and I think EdTech companies need to be aware of that and speak to the things that investors really need to hear to feel comfortable and confident putting their and other people's money into your hands, right? A lot of noise about AI right now, understandably so. A lot of that's, sucking the oxygen out of the room from EdTech in general. But I think even there, investors, I think they're savvy enough to know that a lot of this is just going to go away.
Right. Or I guess the funny thing that I think about a lot is that AI is in our lives already a lot, where it's just how Gmail kind of helps you to write your emails and stuff like that sort of so the idea of I don't know, I guess I can't point to the exact reason, but yeah, in education right now, it's just the sky is falling kind of existential crisis that we're all kind of grappling with right now is that, this revolution is, we're on the precipice of it. But I think the outsized focus and emphasis on it, at the cost of everything else that's happening in education, likely kind of fade away as time goes on, when it's just kind of that's just part of the engine that makes EdTech tools and every other technology go. So, but we will wrap up. I think you've already kind of alluded to this, but just if you have kind of final thoughts around your advice for higher ed leaders, I guess I would say, more the institutional leaders navigating this moment, because certainly that's part of it is you wouldn't hope that they can be discerning like a funder or whatever of just the bright, shiny, oh, we're an AI powered this, that, the other. It's hopefully they as a institutional leader can figure out truly, again, what are our problems? What do we need to do, to address those and work to address them. So yeah, any final thoughts, advice for higher ed leaders?
Yeah, I think the one thing I would point to is that most of those mission critical challenges that we alluded to or discussed directly facing higher ed are ones that require not just an outside-in technological solution, but a lot of internal change and change management. And you have talked about this a bit in the past, right? So I think for higher ed institutions, as you're figuring out what your problems are, how they are unique for your institution and your region, and considering ways in which technology and technology providers can help, also think about the people that you can find to help you. People from the vendor community or people within the technology provider, professional services or support teams that can walk with you hand in hand as you tackle really difficult change management within your institution. Who can provide that support and services, who can almost integrate with your teams to help them change the way that they do things, because that's the only way that you're going to see change and outcomes.
Couldn't agree more. I think, it's, given all the different headwinds and everything that higher education is facing, as an institution, it's the idea of I feel it's a all hands on deck kind of moment. Bring in those collaborators, whether they're, technology providers that might help kind of fill gaps or just be very kind of consultative, kind of supportive and, people that can kind of guide you through this moment. But
yeah, and I don't think most vendors are prepared to do that. Some are, but I think most EdTech vendors would prefer to think of themselves as, deliverers of a product. And they might talk about partnership, but do they have the resources to support that partnership? Or can they connect you with groups who can?
Yeah, that's a good little extra bit of advice for the EdTech companies out there. So thank you so much for all of your insights and just giving a little bit of your time to hang out here at the AIR Show. It's been a real treat. So
it's been fun sitting down with you.
The Hired Geek Podcast is a part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. If you like this podcast, chances you'll like all the other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing constantly, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks all designed to empower you to be a better hired professional. Our shows help you find your next big idea and feature a selection of the industry's best as your host. Learn from people like Jamie Hunt, Seth Odell, Dave Kibbolds, and Eddie Francis, as well as so many other of your favorite leaders in higher education. Enrollify is made possible by the support of Element 451, the leading AI-powered, all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.